In 1833, Tocqueville saw democracy. Town hall meetings, voices raised. Those were simpler, truer days. Neighbors gathered face to face to govern in their common space. Now those days seem long erased by design, not time displaced. We traded self-rule for them all, while Washington controls it all. The founders got just what they planned, elite rule across the land. Liberal elites are panicking. Donald Trump's election, Brexit, populist movements across Europe. Everywhere they look, voters are rejecting the liberal order. Georgetown's Jason Brennan openly calls for epistocracy, rule by a tested elite. Others suggest we might need to jettison democracy altogether. But here's what's fascinating. This isn't the first time educated elites have concluded that democracy is too dangerous to trust. In fact, there's an unbroken intellectual tradition, from Plato and Aristotle to Madison and Hamilton to today's political scientists, that views democracy as inherently suspect, chaotic, and in need of management. What if today's crisis is that democracy failing liberalism, but liberalism finally revealing its true relationship with democracy? What if the system was designed to contain democratic energies from the very beginning? We live in an age where questioning democracy seems backward and authoritarian. But for most of human history, democracy was considered a debased and corrupt form of government. Plato and Aristotle relegated it to the category of vicious or debased regimes, ruled by the mob, driven by passion rather than reason. This ancient suspicion never really disappeared. It just learned to hide behind a new language. Today's leading thinkers retain what they call notional allegiance to democracy, but only by constraining it within the strictures of liberalism. Democracy becomes acceptable only when it produces liberal outcomes. When it doesn't, when democratic majorities reject open borders, free trade, or expert opinion, suddenly we hear the same ancient complaints. The masses are ignorant, driven by emotion, susceptible to demagogues. Sound familiar? James Madison knew this tradition well. In Federalist 10, he wrote that democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. The founders weren't creating a democracy, they were creating a republic designed to contain democratic energies. Madison's solution was brilliant political engineering. He called it the extended orbit. Make political spheres so large and complex that ordinary citizens couldn't effectively organize or govern themselves. Here's how it worked. First, the representative principle. Let elected elites filter and refine popular will. Representatives shouldn't be excessively guided by the people, Madison argued. Their job was to refine and enlarge public views through their superior wisdom. Second, extend this sphere. Create a republic so vast that factions can't combine, trust breaks down, and citizens become isolated from each other. Madison hoped this would create mistrust of motives among the citizens, making them less likely to communicate and organize. This wasn't accidental. Madison wrote that where there is a consciousness of unjust or dishonorable purposes, communication is always checked by distrust in proportion to the number whose concurrence is necessary. He wanted citizens who faced a large mass of fellow citizens whom they are inclined to mistrust. The goal was to redirect human energy from public to private life. Once people recognized their powerlessness in the public realm, they'd focus on achievable private aims and ends. Politics would attract only the ambitious, those drawn to power, while everyone else retreated to private pursuits. Hamilton was even more explicit about this design. In Federalist 17, he dismissed local governance as offering only slender allurements to ambition. The real prizes, commerce, finance, negotiation, and war, belonged to the central government. Hamilton understood human nature. People naturally prefer what's closer to them. Family over neighborhood, neighborhood over distant government. But he added a crucial caveat. This natural preference could be destroyed by a better administration at the federal level. And Hamilton was confident that the federal government would be better administered. Why? Because it would attract select bodies of men, those ambitious enough to pursue real power. The concentration of ambitious elites in the central government would ensure superior administration, gradually destroying people's attachment to local communities. Reading between the lines, Hamilton clearly intended that the federal power would eventually eclipse local loyalty. The populace would come to see the central government as the protector of their freedoms, while viewing local self-governance as an obstacle to that freedom. This explains why neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have successfully devolved power back to states and localities. Despite decades of promises, the system was designed to accumulate power at the center, and it attracts the most ambitious people to ensure that accumulation continues. But there's a counterpoint to this story, captured by Alexis de Tocqueville when he visited America in 1830s. In New England townships, he witnessed something extraordinary, real democratic practice that predated the liberal constitutional order. Tocqueville wrote, "It is hard to explain the place filled by political concerns in the life of an American. To take a hand in the government of society and to talk about it is his most important business and, so to say, the only pleasure he knows." This wasn't our kind of politics, passive spectators choosing between distant candidates. This was direct self-rule, citizens gathering in town halls, making laws together, taking responsibility for their shared life. Tocqueville traced this democratic spirit to Puritan roots and their understanding of liberty. Not liberty as doing whatever you want, what Cotton Mather called the liberty of corrupt nature, but liberty as freedom to choose what is good and just, even when the choice requires discipline and self-limitation. This older liberty was consistent with authority that encouraged citizens to make decisions oriented toward the just and good. While liberals came to see such ordering as the opposite of freedom, Tocqueville understood it as democracy's foundation. Real democracy demanded the discipline of self-rule, citizens simultaneously ruling and being ruled by themselves through ongoing discussion and disputation in particular places with familiar people over time. Fast forward to the early 20th century and we see the same anti-democratic impulse dressed in new scientific clothing. The progressive era witnessed what historian Edward Purcell called the crisis of democratic theory, a moment when social science seemed to prove that democracy was impossible. The evidence was damning. World War I intelligence tests revealed consistently low IQ scores among broad swaths of American population. Social scientists concluded that the masses were guided not by knowledge but by ignorance and whim. Walter Shepard, president of the American Political Science Association in 1934, called for abandoning America's traditional faith in democracy. "We no longer believe that the voice of the people is the voice of God," he declared. "The electorate must lose the halo which has surrounded it. Universal suffrage should give way to a system of educational and other tests which will exclude the ignorant." Even John Dewey, despite his democratic faith, acknowledged in debates with Walter Lippmann that the public was unlikely to rise to the level of civic competence demanded by modern complexity. Maybe poets would be needed to make complex information accessible to ordinary citizens. The progressive solution mirrored Madison's, praised democracy while constraining it. Progressives promoted civil service reform, professional bureaucracy, and the science of administration. Social scientist Elton Mayo declared, "A world over, we are greatly in need of an administrative elite." Here's the key insight. There's a direct line from the founders through the progressives to today's liberal critics of democracy. All share the same basic approach, claim democratic legitimacy while systematically insulating government from popular control. The genius of liberalism was to redefine democracy itself. Instead of democracy as self-rule, we got democracy as individual expression, the expansion of private choice and personal identity. Madison's focus on protecting the diversity in the faculties of men through property evolved into our obsession with lifestyle and identity choices. Citizens became consumers of government services rather than participants in governance. The degraded citizenship that contemporary social scientists measure isn't an accident. It's the predictable outcome of a system designed to redirect human attention from public life to private pursuits. Liberals generate this civic catastrophe and then claim that they must cure it by applying more liberalism. Their presentism, ignorance of their own history, is liberalism's greatest defense against recognizing what it has created. This brings us to today's crisis. When democratic majorities reject liberal assumptions, open borders, free trade, expert rule, liberal elites respond exactly like their predecessors. The problem is democracy itself. But here's Tocqueville's dark prediction coming true. Once a citizenry has been degraded by generations of liberal education in privatism, it can't suddenly rediscover the arts of self-governance. A people trained to see themselves as isolated consumers can't practice Tocquevillian self-command. Instead, their response to liberal failure takes a predictable form. Inarticulate cries for a strongman to rein in the distant forces of state and market. Liberalism seems destined to generate demands for an illiberal autocrat who promises to protect the people against liberalism itself. Tocqueville saw this too. He worried that individualistic democracy would eventually produce what he called democratic despotism, a gentle but pervasive control that reduces citizens to a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which government is the shepherd. So what's the alternative? Tocqueville understood that real democracy requires practice and habituation in self-rule, starting with local communities where citizens learn to govern themselves through direct participation. Real democracy is messy and imperfect. Citizens will often manage public affairs very badly, Tocqueville admitted, but their concern with public affairs extends their mental horizons and shakes them out of the ordinary routine. Democracy transforms narrow self-interest into the concern for the common good, but only through practice. The cure for bad democracy isn't less democracy or rule by experts, it's better democracy, more local, more participatory, and more demanding of the citizens. But this requires abandoning the liberal assumption that politics exist primarily to protect individual expression and private pursuits. So here's where we end. Did the Constitution birth democracy or manage it out of existence? The evidence is clear. From Madison's extended orbit to Hamilton's centralizing ambition, to the Progressive era's administrative elite, to today's epistocracy advocates, there's been a consistent project: harness democratic energy while preventing democratic practice. We call ourselves a democracy, but we practice something else entirely. Managed consent, where citizens choose between pre-selected options while real power accumulates in distant capitals, guided by expert opinion and market forces. The founders succeeded completely. They created a system that could claim democratic legitimacy while ensuring that ambitious elite would govern according to their vision of national greatness and individual liberation from local bonds. Today's populist rebellion isn't democracy finally working, it's the degraded citizenry that liberalism has created finally pushing back against its creators. But having been shaped by centuries of liberal education, this citizenry lacks the civic skills for genuine self-rule. The tragic irony is that democracy's critics are right about democracy's dangers, but they can't see that liberalism itself created the degraded democracy that they fear. And their solution: more expert rule, more constraints on popular will, only accelerates the cycle that produces the very strongman politics they claim to oppose. The question isn't whether this system is good or bad. The question is whether we are honest about what it actually is. A brilliant political technology for claiming popular legitimacy while ensuring elite rule. The founders got exactly what they designed. Whether it's what we want or what we can escape remains to be seen.